That is why we are happy. Praise the Lord.
We don't have a sad God. We have a happy God.
In the mid-1980s, something strange began happening in isolated communities around the world. Families living everywhere from small towns to remote villages found mysterious VHS tapes placed on their doorsteps. There was no return address, no production label, no explanation whatsoever, just a plain note attached that read, "For the children of the house." Parents assumed the tapes were harmless, something educational, maybe religious, the sort of thing kind strangers sometimes mailed out back then. So they gathered their children in front of the television, inserted the tape into the VCR, and pressed play. The screen filled with cheerful music and bright, handmade sets.
Life with Grandpa, what could be more fun? Living where there's love for everyone.
Colorful puppets appeared, introducing themselves as a loving family led by a wise, gentle grandfather who wanted to teach kids about kindness, prayer, and obedience. The show called itself Life with Grandpa, and for many children, it became a regular part of their lives. They watched it over and over, just as they would Sesame Street or VeggieTales. They memorized the songs. They grew attached to the puppets. They absorbed every lesson the family taught them. But what none of these families realized, what none of the children could possibly understand, was that this seemingly wholesome puppet show wasn't created by a church, a Christian organization, or a family-friendly ministry. Life with Grandpa was created by a cult led by one of the most manipulative and destructive religious figures of the 20th century. And the puppet show that thousands of children watched with excitement and trust was actually a carefully engineered tool of indoctrination, designed to shape the minds of kids before they could even understand what they were being exposed to. On the surface, Life with Grandpa looked like a typical low-budget Christian program from the 80s. The characters lived together in a humble home. There was Grandpa, the central figure who guided the family, Mother Maria, a quiet and soft-spoken woman who rarely expressed her own opinions, and three children, Davida, Techi, and Davidito. Every episode revolved around Grandpa's lessons. The family would reenact a story or engage in a small moral dilemma. There were prayer segments.
We have two prayer adventures today, the Miracle Ride and the Lost Kite.
Songs and cheerful expressions of gratitude. To a child, it felt warm and comforting, full of simple ideas about love, sharing, and faith. But even in the earliest episodes, subtle details hinted that something wasn't quite right. The script emphasized obedience to an unusual degree.
Thanks us because he loves us and wants us to obey and be good.
It's for your own good. It's because he loves you and wants you to be good and obey.
Children were told to obey instantly, without questioning their parents or the adults around them. The show discouraged independent thinking. Women were consistently portrayed as silent supporters, whose main purpose was to cook, clean, and raise children without complaint. It felt less like a religious program and more like a behavioral training tool, an instruction manual disguised as entertainment. At the time, however, families who received the tapes had no real reason to be suspicious. They assumed it was simply a strange but well-intentioned gift. Many kept the tapes and re-watched them year after year. Life with Grandpa became part of their childhood, and yet none of them had any idea where the show really came from. But to understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, long before the puppets were built, long before the songs were written, and long before those mysterious VHS tapes started appearing around the world. Before Life with Grandpa existed as a puppet show, it existed as a series of illustrated children's books called Life of Grandpa. These were not ordinary children's books. There was no publisher, no public release, no bookstore copies. These books circulated only inside a private religious organization known as the Children of God. Members of the group, living in shared communal homes, read these books to their children as part of their daily spiritual routine. The books presented the same characters later found in the puppet show: Grandpa, Mother Maria, Davida, Techi, and Davidito, teaching lessons about morality and faith. But they also included themes that no mainstream Christian group would ever endorse: blind obedience to leadership, complete rejection of the outside world, total dependence on the community, distrust of doctors, punishment framed as love, and woven throughout the stories were unsettling undercurrents that survivors later recognized as indoctrination, conditioning that shaped children to accept whatever they were told without resistance. The puppet show was a nearly shot-for-shot adaptation of these books. Same lessons, same stories, same tone, except the show lacked the most extreme illustrations from the books, which were softened or removed entirely. Still, even with the edits, the ideology remained intact. Life with Grandpa wasn't created to entertain children. It was created to instruct them, to make them obedient, to prepare them for the belief system of the cult they were born into. But who was behind this? Who wrote the books? Who approved the lessons? Who created Grandpa in the first place? The answer lies in the story of one man. David Berg, born in 1919, grew up in a highly religious household. His parents were traveling preachers who believed they were chosen by God to spread their message across America. Berg absorbed their apocalyptic worldview at an early age, and by adulthood, he was determined to become a religious leader himself. In the late 1960s, Berg launched a movement aimed at counterculture youth, particularly people struggling with addiction, homelessness, or a lack of belonging. He promised love, acceptance, and spiritual renewal. His group began small, holding gatherings in California, but spread rapidly as word of his unconventional message traveled. He called his movement Teens for Christ. But as it grew, it became known by a far more infamous name, the Children of God. As his power increased, Berg's teachings became more extreme. He declared himself a prophet. He published hundreds of letters, known as Mo letters, that his followers were required to study. These letters contained his beliefs, his commands, and his interpretations of Scripture. Members treated them with the same reverence they gave the Bible. Berg eventually convinced his followers that the end of the world was approaching and that they needed to abandon the United States. He ordered them to relocate around the globe and establish communal homes where they could live apart from society. Once isolated, he banned traditional media, claiming it was corrupted by the world. So the group began producing its own materials, music, comics, instructional guides, and children's educational content. This is where life with Grandpa began. Berg understood that if he could shape the minds of children early enough, they would accept the group's teachings without resistance. So he created media specifically designed to influence them. Media that emphasized loyalty, obedience, and dependence on leadership. Grandpa, the puppet patriarch, wasn't just a fictional character. He was Berg's self-insert, his idealized version of himself as a wise, unquestioned leader whose voice always represented the truth. Children watching Life with Grandpa weren't just being taught lessons. They were being conditioned to accept the authority of a man they had never met, a man who controlled every aspect of their lives from afar. Survivors of the cult have described Life with Grandpa as one of the main pieces of media they were allowed to watch as children. Television shows, movies, and secular music were banned. Books from outside the group were forbidden. Children grew up with little to no understanding of outside culture. The puppet show wasn't just a program, it was a worldview. The lessons in the show had very specific objectives. Children were taught that obedience brought blessings. They were taught that questioning authority meant they were spiritually weak. They were told that if they felt unhappy or confused, the problem was within themselves, not in the adults around them. They were taught to ignore discomfort, to trust leadership completely, to accept whatever rules were placed on them. The most disturbing part is how normal these lessons felt to a child. The show used soft music, friendly characters, and comforting imagery to communicate ideas that were anything but harmless. It blurred the line between love and control, between guidance and manipulation. Adults who grew up in the cult later described feeling trapped by teachings they didn't fully understand, but couldn't escape from. Life with Grandpa was one of the earliest introductions to that system. It was the beginning of a lifelong pattern, a pattern designed by Berg. Understanding the show also requires understanding the people who played the characters. Mother Maria was based on Karen Zerbe, Berg's partner and eventual successor. Zerbe became the de facto leader of the cult after Berg's death. She shaped the group's doctrines, oversaw the production of media, and enforced strict obedience within the communes. The children in the show represented real children born into the group, including a boy known as Davidito. His life became heavily documented by the cult, and he was treated as Berg's spiritual successor when he was very young. Survivors later described how he was placed on a pedestal, used as an example to other children, and given constant attention by the cult's leadership. The puppet characters weren't fictional creations. They were symbolic representations of actual people living within the cult's highest ranks. Watching the show now, knowing this, adds a disturbingly personal dimension to what seemed like simple children's entertainment. Life with Grandpa wasn't created by anonymous television producers. It was created by the people who controlled the cult. And every character, every song, and every lesson carried hidden layers connected to their real lives. Between the 1970s and 1990s, the cult spread across more than 70 countries. Communes existed in South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, and remote islands throughout the world. Each commune was a closed-off environment with limited outside contact. Life with Grandpa became one of the most widely distributed pieces of the group's media. The tapes were duplicated hundreds of times using old VHS recorders. They were mailed to new communes, hand-delivered by traveling members, and stored in communal libraries for children to watch repeatedly. Many families kept these tapes even after leaving the group. They were relics of their past, unwanted, but hard to discard. Years later, some of these families rediscovered the tapes while cleaning out attic boxes. Others digitized them, not realizing that they were among the only surviving copies. Without these accidental archives, the show might have disappeared entirely. Instead, it resurfaced, and for the first time, people outside the cult saw what thousands of children had watched in isolation. As the years passed, more members left the group. Journalists began exposing hidden practices. Governments took notice. Investigations were launched. Survivors began speaking about their experiences publicly. The Children of God tried to rebrand themselves as the Family International, distancing themselves from their past while attempting to maintain control. But the damage was already irreversible. Many of the group's teachings came under global scrutiny, and several of their communes disbanded. Life with Grandpa quietly vanished. The cult no longer distributed tapes. The puppet sets were dismantled. The production team scattered. For a long time, the show existed only in the memories of those who had grown up with it. But as former members began reconnecting online, sharing their stories, and comparing the media they once consumed, recordings of the show began appearing. Clips leaked on forums. Survivors uploaded digitized versions to archives. Researchers studying cults stumbled across these videos and realized their significance. The show was no longer hidden. It was finally exposed. And now, people everywhere could see exactly what the cult had been showing its children. Today, Life with Grandpa stands as one of the most disturbing examples of manipulative children's media, not because of graphic content or scary imagery, but because of the intentions behind it. This puppet show wasn't created to entertain. It wasn't created to educate. It wasn't created to spread Christianity. It was created to shape the minds of children raised in a closed environment, to reinforce the authority of cult leaders, to normalize obedience and suppress critical thinking, to introduce a worldview where questioning was discouraged and compliance was rewarded. To a child unaware of the world outside their commune, Life with Grandpa felt like truth. It was their Sesame Street, their Mr. Rogers, their entire reality. But behind the puppets and songs was a system of control crafted by one man, David Berg, and carried out by those who believed in his teachings. Life with Grandpa is unsettling because it reveals how far a dangerous leader will go to influence the vulnerable. how something that looks harmless can carry a hidden agenda, and how childhood innocence can be shaped or manipulated by the people who claim to protect it. Most disturbing stories come from lost tapes or forgotten archives. This one came from a children's show, and the fact that it was meant to feel comforting is what makes it truly terrifying.